To close out our final presentations this year, we have Mallory Gilliland and Whitney Jones from the University of Kansas. They're going to talk about facility planning and development. Mallory is the Director of Facilities, Events, and Capital Projects at KU. In her role, she oversees event management for volleyball and women's basketball. She also helps oversee rowing, swimming and diving, indoor track and field, and cross country. She currently manages facility operations for the Horsch Family Volleyball Arena and assists with the rowing, boathouse, and Robinson Natatorium, as well as small capital projects and renovations throughout the athletic department. Prior to coming to Kansas, she spent a year as the game day operations out in California at UCLA Athletics. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in hotel and restaurant management, as well as a minor in business from Auburn University, and she has her MBA from KU. She is also currently working on a master's in construction management. Presenting along with her is Whitney Jones. Whitney works as an architect and project manager for the University of Kansas within facilities planning and development. A graduate of KU, she has been involved with numerous project types and scales across the campus's 200 plus university buildings and affiliated corporations, one of whom being Kansas Athletics. She has been working at FPD for 7 years and continues to build spaces and relationships through her projects that advance the university's mission of excellence in higher education. So without further ado, I will turn this over to Mallory and Whitney.
Thank you. This is Mallory speaking. You guys won't see my face today because I'm going to be the one sharing, but I'm going to speak first and then Whitney will jump on here too. But we wanted to kind of preface this with just saying that although Whitney is an architect by trade, she was not the architect of record for this project. She was on the owner's team. So this whole presentation is going to be from the owner's perspective. She was kind of an advocate, as her bio kind of mentioned. The university assigns a project manager from our central facilities office. So that was Whitney's role here. And so we just wanted to preface the whole thing to make sure nobody was confused that Whitney was the one designing this building.
So yeah, we'll talk a little bit kind of about where we were at the Horsch facility, where we ended up and kind of what we learned along the way.
Cool. So we'll start at the beginning here with the original Horsch Family Athletics Center. So it was built in '98, and you can see back here this building in the top photo. That's our current men's and women's basketball practice facility. You can see down here when it was built, didn't exist. So this Horsch Family Athletics Center was built as the basketball practice facility when Roy Williams was here. Our current volleyball coach, Coach Bichard, was also here at that time, but volleyball was in Allen Fieldhouse, which is right next door. And so it was nice to have that facility for basketball to minimize some scheduling challenges, but we still had teams sharing the Fieldhouse and that facility. So eventually in 2009, the practice gym did get built for basketball. And so volleyball was able to kind of shift into Horsch and kind of make it their home. And it eventually became their home competition venue as well. So it had its challenges as a competition venue since it wasn't built for that initially. So it was a small venue. It had about 1,300 seats. 1,301, I believe was the actual number. But those are all retractable bleacher seats that had to be taken up and down for each game. It didn't have a lot of space for fans. It wasn't built for fans. It wasn't built for fan engagement. There was, I'll talk a little bit in the next slide about, or the next couple slides, but there was no room for video or anything that marketing or our external folks wanted to do. It just wasn't really set up very well as a competition venue. It did have a couple advantages, and we always laugh. Whitney said when we were building this presentation, but people weren't shy about telling us in our programming meetings like what they hated about Horsch. But she would always ask them like, was there anything good? Like, are there things we need to keep? And the overwhelming response, especially from the coaches and the players and the people that really used the building, was the atmosphere. Because it was so small, it was an intimate facility, it was loud, it was intimidating for visiting teams, and they didn't want to lose that, especially when we were talking about building a larger facility. They also really liked, as I mentioned, the scheduling, having their own volleyball specific and not having to worry about any sort of conflicts or anything, and having it right there in the middle of our athletics complex, which we'll also talk about a little bit later. was really important, and they liked that about it. The location also became important with the donor, and we'll discuss that a little bit later too. And then finally, the best thing probably for the team was, since it was built for basketball, it had 3 volleyball courts with like 18 feet in between each court. So there was a ton of space, practice space, that normally most of you probably know doesn't really exist for volleyball specific facilities. So this is where we landed. This is the new Horsch Family Volleyball Arena, which we obviously named to reflect the commitment to women's athletics and having a volleyball specific facility. That's really rare, as most of you probably are aware. When we were doing our research and trying to find some comparable facilities, there really aren't very many that are volleyball specific. They usually have wrestling or gymnastics or just something else besides volleyball. So it's unique in that way. It went from about 23,000 square feet to 32. So it did get a little bit bigger, but stayed in the same footprint. The capacity, we say 2,200-ish seats because we'll talk about a little later and show you, but there's a mezzanine level that accommodates some standing room, and we haven't, through one season, really landed on what number we're comfortable with up there, where we're striking the balance of packing in as many people as we can and letting everybody see what's happening. So that number's a little squishy still, but capacity-wise, it's bigger for the fans. There's more space for them to move around. There's more seats for them to be there, and then it's bigger for the team. All of their spaces got bigger. They've got their own dedicated training room, all of their lounge, locker room area, all that stuff, square footage-wise, got a little bigger as well. They got TerraFlex, they got a video board, we have this mezzanine hospitality space. So overall, an upgrade in a lot of areas. This was the old facility, probably 5 or so years before we tore it down. So I just want to take this slide to kind of point out some general challenges that we faced in there. So as you can see, the walkways are pretty tight behind the benches. So there's a lot of access to players and coaches from the general public at all times. It's also a little bit of a struggle for, I should say, for people sitting behind the bench or in the first couple rows. It was really hard to see, as like most of you probably realize, volleyball players stand up the whole game, and that would block a lot of people's views and make people upset. We had a lot of ADA seating challenges because it was just right behind the benches, so then they couldn't see.
Did we ever put in any?
Then we had, as you guys can see, some basketball goals that were in there that would swing down, since that's what it was for. The lobby and the concession area was tiny, and so just general public walking around was just a congested mess most of the time. The ceiling, as you can see, was pitched, and when you got out to these edges, it was only about 20 feet to the bottom of these columns, so just wasn't really ideal for volleyball specifically. And then, like I kind of mentioned before, this little guy up here on a lift that I rented every season was our video solution. So it shook when the building got loud, and it just was not a good situation for TV or our in-house Rock Chalk video folks. And then going even further, a lot of you probably are familiar with NCAA championships and maybe even hosting volleyball championships. And a lot of the things that they like for you to accommodate, Horsch just didn't have room for. So this is our cheerleader section. It's about a 4x4 foot square. So that's not the amount you're supposed to provide, especially for both teams on both sides. They're really in the way. Bands, a little bit of a struggle as well. Seating capacity gets really, really tight when you start to give out visiting team allotments and visiting band allotments, and then participating institution tickets. And all of a sudden you have like 100 tickets to give to your fans. And that's the most exciting point in the season. So we had some tough conversations on that. So it just wasn't ideal when the program really started to get better. It wasn't an ideal facility at all. So, kind of the story of how we got to building a new one was obviously when we started to go to the NCAA tournament in the postseason, a couple years in a row, we realized it wasn't ideal, but really still they were just wanting a video board. They wanted to increase the atmosphere. They wanted a video board and they wanted TerraFlex. And when we started to price those items out, we realized like the money we were going to spend almost started to feel like putting lipstick on a pig, because we still weren't going to have the right capacity. We still weren't going to have the ceiling heights that we wanted. there was a lot of things we weren't going to accomplish by spending a lot of money putting into that old building that wasn't really designed for that. So long story short, they went to the donor, obviously Mr. Horsch, again, and he agreed that we could go again, rebuild for volleyball, with the exception that we accommodate some men's basketball hospitality, which is what you're seeing over here on the mezzanine. And so they really quickly went through a design with the architect that actually ended up being our architect, and came up with, we think it would be a $10 million project on the site that you're currently at. And they went to the donor with that, and he agreed immediately, and we were off to the races on a new building. So Whitney will explain a little bit of the challenges of that later, but that's basically how we got to that. There was a little bit of a controversial decision in there, because the way it was sold to Mr. Horsch at the time, since it was so early, was that we wanted a venue that could accommodate an NCAA regional, which the seating minimum was 3,000. So that's how the building was sold to him. And as we got into programming and really evaluating what we wanted this building to be, we realized that $10 million number and that 3,000 seat number weren't super compatible with each other, and they weren't going to give us the facility that we really wanted as far as graphics and amenities for the teams and amenities for our fans. All those things kind of fell off of the programming when we started really looking at the budget and the size. So we made the strategic decision to cut that seat count down, add in some chair backs, add in a very large hospitality space, and then give the team all the things that they were really interested in, the flashy graphics and the video board and all this stuff that was maybe going to get cut to afford adding in all those seats. So it was a controversial decision. It still, quite frankly, is. There's still people that ask me why we would build a brand new building and not build it big enough for a regional. But we have a venue next door. We have Allen Fieldhouse connected to Horsch Family Volleyball Arena, and we can always host over there if it were to ever come for that. So we felt like we made the best decision for the girls, the team, for most of the year.
So this is kind of where facilities planning and development, our office, kind of picks up and helps athletics kind of on these projects. So they'd already had some donor engagement and had a funding commitment. So what that means to us is we basically have to generate a program. And athletics had engaged Gould Evans earlier to kind of do some preliminary stuff to kind of get to that $10 million budget of what they thought it was going to be at. So by the time that we got involved and this project was really rolling, it was probably about a year and a half kind of after that commitment had been made. So what that means on my end is we generate a program and we need to get campus approvals. So basically, once we have a program, we go to CPC, which is the chancellor and high level administrators, to basically make sure that they approve that this project happens. And then from there, it goes to the Kansas Board of Regents for approval. That's the approval process in a nutshell, I will say, because I think everybody probably does things a little bit differently. But once we have that approval, the unique thing about this project is we knew that we wanted to have this facility basically demolished and constructed in volleyball off season, which basically gave us from December to August to build a building, which in reality isn't really that long when you look at a construction schedule. So based off of that information, we kind of started leaning towards that maybe we need to be a little bit more creative in how we procure and get like a contractor and a designer on board for the project. So this project was actually advertised as a design build. So that process in a nutshell is we would submit an RFQ out and then shortlist an interview. So we actually ended up interviewing 4 different contractors. And at the end of the day, the folks that helped build this building was McCowan Gordon and teamed with Gould Evans. So this is actually a slide that we talked about in the interview, knowing that we had a really short construction window and we were advertising as design build. So to help illustrate that, option 1 is truly what a design build would look like. So you're making decisions and you're getting permitting and you're ordering materials and you're going all at the same time. And the way that they show it is basically that's how it would fit within that window. But they were really willing to have an honest conversation saying, yes, this is a really aggressive schedule. We'll do it if that's what you need to do. But there's some other options that maybe you want to think about. And that's kind of what option 3 and 4 are showing you. Is that it would be a good idea to take a year to design if you have a year based on your donor commitments and kind of how that was agreed upon. So that's in the end, that's what we did, but it was a conversation we had way back even in the interviews. So this is a good illustration showing option 1, which is what a true design build would look like. And option 4, it kind of stretches it out. So it's more of like a CM at risk type of contract where you're basically designing, and then part of the initiative of doing that was trying to get some early procurement of materials to try to beat some of that escalation that we knew we'd be facing. But I think this does a good job of kind of showing you the difference of the schedule and the difference of those contracts a little bit. So for those who aren't familiar with campus, this is an aerial showing a portion of main campus, and where you see the ballpark right there. Just north of that is Allen Fieldhouse and kind of a sports complex, because there's the old indoor football, indoor track facility now. And then kind of sandwiched right in between all of that is the old Horsch. And as you can kind of see, it's a little bit landlocked because it has buildings all the way around it, and it has parking lots on the other sides of it. So that also was conducive to going design build, having a contractor really on board from the very beginning so we could figure out lead times and materials and how things got to site. And so we actually had somebody on board to help with that. So this is zoomed in even further, and this is the old Horsch, and kind of there on the right-hand side where you see green arrows going in, just to give you a little lay of the land. That's a donor entrance to Allen Fieldhouse, which we knew we had to maintain this whole time. And then just south of that is kind of where the TV trucks park for game days. So figuring out logistics of when trucks would arrive so we could figure out access to the site. And then the red arrows kind of show traffic flow. So we knew that we had to keep that road open because there's different parking lots that access the different dorms and facilities and all kinds of things. The blue dashed line basically shows the outline of where our construction site was. So this is a picture of the old Horsch, as I said, but you notice that the square footage didn't grow too terribly much, but it did grow to the south and to the east a little bit. And then the other constraint on the other side was the loading dock, which is basically the main loading dock for the entire complex. So we knew we had to keep that open and definitely make some coordination happen while construction was going on. I suppose one of the nice things we actually did to the contractor was give him a generous laydown area so they could at least facilitate parking. Anybody who's done a project on campus knows that parking is always a fun one to figure out. So they at least could have some parking and laydown area and trailer in relative proximity location to their site. So decommissioning, this was the first building that I've ever demolished. So there was some learning curve happening there as well. Thinking about from my end of things, how facilities, maybe what things are worth salvaging and what things aren't. So really it was a conversation with facility services, basically trying to figure out what we could use in other locations. And one example of that was the fire alarm in this building. It was a little bit older, but it work in other buildings. So they basically salvaged the fire alarm so they could use the parts other places. Another thing that we looked at is we knew that they had just put in a new RTU, a rooftop unit in this building that they could use in another building. So looking at how we could salvage that and just really working with everybody on campus to make sure that everything was going where it needed to go, even down to like the light bulbs we were taking out of the building.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here too and say, going with the theme of this presentation of things that we learned, I think getting ahead of it with your external staff, so your marketing, your development folks, to see what items they might have some interest in. So we knew, obviously, from Whitney's slide on timeline that we had a year of planning. And so we were able to be strategic kind of about things that we could sell, things that we needed to reuse in other locations that were athletic specific, separate from the stuff that Whitney was talking about. So a huge one obviously was the court. My boss, Brad Noctegal, who was on the project as well, had the foresight that this vision, this bar up here on the top with the old court underneath was his vision from way before design even began. And so we had the luxury of having the architect draw out how to cut out the court in order to incorporate that old court into the new facility. But we also had pieces that we didn't know what we wanted to do with, but we knew that they were cool. So like this Big 12 here, we just cut it out just as one big logo, knowing we might want to do something. And then by the time the building was finished, we put it under the floor of the riser in the film room. So when the girls are watching film, this is what's under their feet now, is the Big 12 from the old court. So being strategic about how you're going to reuse things, but then also just in case use things. And then also like I said, getting marketing, development, compliance, everybody in on it from the beginning. We were able to do some little salvaged court pieces for the grand opening that had the logo of the new building etched on them as like the take home gift for everybody that attended the grand opening. So just little things like that, like getting those people involved really early so that they can help you brainstorm what they're going to want and then how you need to accomplish that when it comes time to decommission.
And the other part, we kind of talked about it a little bit when we were talking about the site, but really thinking critically about if you're taking a building down, what that does to the adjacent buildings, and really making sure that you maintain your exits and how people get out of those existing buildings.
So this slide we just threw in here just to kind of reiterate the proximity of these buildings to the whole old construction site / new building. So in this right-hand side picture, this building up here is our indoor track, used to be indoor football facility. So obviously the December to August timeline includes the indoor track season. So there was a lot of coordination with not just practice, but actual meets with indoor track as far as when the new precast was going up and their building actually being in the fall zone of those panels. So having to shut down, a whole side of their facility and kind of shift events around so that everybody stayed out of it. And then also this photo is taken from the rooftop of Allen Fieldhouse. So this wall here on your right-hand side is actually the roof of the Fieldhouse. So you can just see how close they are, and they're actually connected in two different spots. So like Whitney said, just the challenges of doing a project in the middle of men's and women's basketball season in the Fieldhouse, and being connected and usually using those buildings together for those events. So just a lot of logistics when being landlocked like it is. And who doesn't love a good demo video? Bye, Horsch. This is actually taken from the balcony of our baseball press box. So again, another building that's right there in the same proximity.
And you'll notice they're being pretty strategic about how they demo things and where they demo things. So they're making different piles of concrete and steel and other materials. So those leave on trucks. So we could potentially recycle as much as we could from the existing building.
Ta-da.
So that slide that you saw was back in December. So here we are, flash forward to January 2019. You're starting to see kind of the footings of the building and the foundation going in. This is just to say, December and January in Kansas can give you some weather conditions that maybe aren't the best conducive for doing concrete work. So this is just showing some progress of where we're at basically a month in.
So we'll talk about design a little bit, and this is maybe where some of our lessons learned can come in as well. So the biggest eye-opening part to me about my first project was just how many stakeholders there are, how many opinions there are, and how you constantly are trying to navigate through whose voice should be the loudest and who gets the last say. In this project specifically, we had a very active donor who was very interested in how the building aesthetically looked, especially from the exterior. So she didn't like, this is the donor's daughter was very involved, and she didn't like the staircase that was originally designed in the front windows. So our architect had to go back. I'm showing you 6 of probably 8 or 9 different iterations he came up with to try and please her on her staircase request. So as you can see, he kind of put half a staircase, he put some little stairs. I think this is the one we actually ended on, but just going through that process. So having him get all these different drawings and renderings together and being ready to meet with the donor when they happen to be in town for a football game or whatever it was just a lot of coordination, but also some good base time for me, myself personally, being young in college athletics. It was a good opportunity to be in the room with architects, our development staff, and big time donors. So that was a good learning experience, but also trying to manage her requests and her vision for the building with our campus as a whole. So Whitney's office has people in charge of kind of like zoning for a city, like how this building fits into everything else. So down to the color, the shape, the look. You can't put a big red and blue circus top in the middle of our campus that's all limestone and classic. So there was just a lot of cooks in the kitchen at all times, and trying to kind of wade through who gets the final say was a big piece of being the owner's contact. And then also kind of in the same vein, you sit through programming meetings, which I learned what they were on this project. You sit through programming meetings. So everyone who could possibly touch the facility and what their kind of vision or hopes or dreams are for this new facility. And then it's on you to kind of follow up as the design progresses and say, yes, that's what they had in mind, or no, or take some different options back to them and say, is this what you wanted, or how would you like this? So you're the one that's kind of listening to that feedback initially, and then trying to make sure that you're following up and getting those requests incorporated as much as possible into the design at the end. So kind of going along with that, I would say your biggest asset to the team is knowing your program. So the more you can do. Luckily, when I did this project, I'd had 4 years under my belt with Coach Bouchard and the volleyball team and the facility and as the event manager. So I knew the program in and out. I knew how they like to practice, when they like to practice, what temperature they wanted it to be, all those kind of things. So I think that was one of my biggest takeaways, is that's your opportunity as the owner to be valuable, to be able to be the voice in the room that knows what they're going to want and how they're going to use the building. So there were some times where they asked me questions like, I don't know, I don't go to practice, I don't know what they're doing. But a lot of the time they would ask me, how do they want this, or how will they use it that way? And I was able to tell them like what would make the most sense. So I think that's just one of my biggest takeaways as the owner's contact, is just knowing your program inside and out so that you can be that advocate from the start to the finish. I wanted to throw in a slide about graphics, because as the owner's contact, again, it becomes one of the biggest pieces that you're managing. It takes up a lot of your time. And for this project specifically, we had a lot of hurdles. So we were with Advent for the very first time, which we'd never been on a project with them. So they were kind of learning our staff. We had a lot of people in the room at the beginning. Coach Bouchard, like I said, had been around for 20 years. We have a Hall of Athletics on campus or in the field house that kind of highlights all of our sports programs' histories. But his vision for this space was to have kind of a volleyball specific Hall of Fame feel in all the graphics in the public areas. So with that in mind, we sat down with a bunch of people and got kind of the first pass going. And then we got a new athletic director, and he brought in a lot of new faces, and they wanted to kind of update our branding and our fonts and all that kind of stuff. So we had a round two with a lot of different faces. And then Adidas also got involved. They wanted to show some commitment to women's athletics and volleyball specific gear and things like that. So they actually had some staff turnover in the middle. So by the time it was all said and done, from the whole 2-year process, there were so many people involved. And again, going back to just managing whose voice was the loudest and who was still sitting there at the end of the 2 years with their feedback being incorporated. So that's just a piece that I maybe didn't anticipate being as big of a deal as it was, and as being as time consuming as it was, because there were so many emails that at the end of the day, a lot of people just dropped off, just stopped talking because they were so overwhelmed. And it kind of came down to me at the very end, at the last minute, being like, yes, this is the picture we're going with, because I can't pass it around 16 more times. And then also, a lot of you are probably familiar with this process just in graphics in general, but the contractor needed to coordinate with the graphics company to get lighting and power and things that they needed, and they were going to be done a lot sooner than the graphics were coming in to be installed. So that was also some work on my plate to make sure that the two were connecting with each other, and then that the work that needed to be done for them before they got there was completed.
So I'll preface this slide saying no one got hurt, which is why we'll probably talk about it. But Mallory had a perfect segue earlier where she was talking about why we had part of the indoor facility basically closed off because it was in the drop zone. So what happened here is just showing that, you know, inevitably things will go wrong, but it's kind of more about how you react to it and how you can figure out what needs to happen to keep things moving. So here you see a pretension panel that dropped when they lifted it, the bottom, and you can kind of see the little strands at the bottom. So those are steel, and we had to be really careful about how they moved that after the fact, because we didn't want it to shatter and pop even more. But hats off to McCowan and Gould Evans on this one, because really, after something goes wrong, you kind of have to, the team has to get together and figure out how to move forward. And they did shuffle around different scheduling of other things. So what else in the building could we do while we were waiting on this 3 weeks for this new panel to get here? And they were able to do that because at the end of the day, we knew when this had to be complete and why it had to be complete. So inevitably things will go wrong, but it's more about how you react to them. And then one of the key takeaways that I hadn't really thought about in new construction when you're building it that may be helpful is really understanding the critical path items, and it may just be worth sitting down with the contractor to talk about that, just so you have an understanding. So if something does happen, you kind of understand the impacts of what that means. But the IT room, the importance of the IT room is something that I wouldn't have thought of initially, but a lot of the systems, specifically mechanical systems, all have to have the IT room up and running. So for this particular project, we needed an IT room that was dirt-free, conditioned, ready for equipment to come into it so we could get the units up and running, so we could start conditioning the space, so we could start getting the wood cord in. So it's kind of just understanding key drivers like that so you can be prepared for things to come up.
Anybody see anything wrong with this photo? I know you're all muted, so spoiler alert, it says Jawhawk. This photo was on the front page of our local newspaper. So basically what happened was we double, triple, quadruple checked all of the submittals from the graphics company. They all were correct. Like I mentioned, we changed fonts on them in the middle, and we had a lot of different eyes, and everybody agreed that it Rock Chalk Jayhawk, and it was good, and it went up on the wall. And that was about I don't know, a couple weeks before the season started probably, and it said Rock Chalk Jayhawk, but it was the wrong font. It was the original font. So called Advent. They came out from Nashville and put this guy up about 4 days before our first match in the new facility. And we did an interview with the local newspaper. They came out, they took photos. And the next day I got a call from Brad that said, your core graphics wrong. And so all of this to say, so I guess I'll finish the story. So we went out to the dumpster. We grabbed the wrong font, correct Jayhawk graphic. Luckily, it was a fabric graphic, so we threw it in the washer in the equipment room, laid it out to dry in the bleachers, and then Brad and myself got up on lifts and installed that baby right for the first match. So all of that to say, like Whitney said, things are gonna go wrong. You can double, triple, quadruple check, and things will still go wrong. And I think maybe that's the advantage a lot of us would have working on a capital project, is that having an event manager background helps you know that things just go wrong, and you have to just be calm and handle it and move forward. And that's what we did. So it now says Rock Chalk Jayhawk in the correct font in the new facility. And also my last little things will go wrong is put up a flag for your national anthem for your first match. Just, it's a good idea.
A quick pro tip. So this is a picture showing where we're at in February. So we're actually going vertical, and you can kind of see the structural steel going on, and some precast is being set. And the CMU wall, that block wall that you see on the right picture, is basically the practice facility. So understanding that you're truly working adjacent to an existing facility. And then the other picture obviously is showing Alan, just just another picture showing how close that project actually was, and maintaining access to the field house, especially on a game day. Knowing that the logistics of that meant that the construction site probably shut down around noon so they could clean up, and they were out of there by 3 on game days. Just another quick picture showing where we're at in March. We have precast and we're starting to do framing. So this is a similar image to kind of the first one that you saw at the very beginning. And there's a concrete truck in there that's pouring some concrete slab up on the mezzanine. And then by April, we're starting to pour concrete floor basically inside the facility. So this is just an image to kind of give you some kind of scale of what humans look like inside of it. And who doesn't love a great concrete slab?
Okay, so these photos have nothing to do with budget, but I wanted to make sure that Whitney and I were featured in our glamorous PP&E in this project or in this presentation somewhere. So there it is, different PP than we're used to hearing these days, but there we are. I also wanted to use this slide to kind of shout out our project team. So the guy in the black shirt there is our architect, and then the rest of them work for McCown Gordon, our project manager and superintendents and engineers. So all of that to just kind of say the takeaway, I guess, for Whitney and I was as much as you possibly can to learn your project team before, like during the interview process. I know that's a difficult thing to do, but the more you know the players, they can really make the difference between your project being pleasant and being a real headache. So we'll talk about a little later some of the takeaways as far as small projects versus large projects, but that's kind of something that we both have talked about before, is that working on some smaller projects with McCown Gordon, like locker room renovations, office renovations, helped us kind of get to know the players and then know how they functioned and the tools they use. And that really helped us on this project moving forward. And then having guys that will listen to you and advocate for the things that you are interested in, even when it sounds kind of crazy at the beginning. And these guys really did an excellent job of doing that. Whitney, you got comments on McCown?
No, I think you covered it well. They did a great job of listening to us. And I mean, at the end of the day, we're 2 females and we probably threw things on the table that they really weren't thinking about. And they actually were listening and receptive and were willing to work with us, which at the end of the day made for a really great project team.
Yeah. And I think also, they did a lot of work that we didn't see on negotiating and arguing on costs to try and get us in our budget, which is kind of a good segue to the actual point of this slide. So we showed you kind of earlier on the programming slide that we had a $10 million gift approved through the state for this project. And like by the time we'd gone through the 2 years of honestly kind of some inflation and just getting all the programming set of what we wanted this building to be. Like I mentioned before, it was just more than a $10 million building. So the way that we were able to be creative and not have to go through the red tape of increasing the project cost for this one was to creatively manage our facility or furniture, fixtures, and equipment budget. So basically what that means is that we took out anything that could be taken out of the construction budget and moved it to be paid by athletics in a separate fund. So the TerraFlex, the lockers, the wall pads, like think of things that could be taken out of the construction and managed by the owner. And that's how we managed to stay in the $10 million number. It also saved us probably a little bit because most of the fees associated with a large capital project are based on a percentage of the project cost. So taking those things out helped us save a fee or a markup that would have been in there had we coordinated it through the project.
Yeah. So one of the things I'll say on that too is whenever you're starting to get creative and you're moving stuff in and out of different budgets that you're working on, understanding that, you know, if you remove the lockers from the scope, you're kind of taking that on as your own liability as the owner. So you really have to coordinate. And since I threw this slide in with the drop precast panel, I feel like it's only fair to share my oops moment of making sure that you coordinate the lockers with where they're going to be installed. So that means coordinating the bulkhead height and the openings and electrical and everything that goes along with that when you pull it out of the contractor scope.
Yeah. And like Whitney said, like that fell on our plate at the end. So a lot of those pieces go in after you've achieved occupancy, obviously. So when the contractors are winding down, I felt like I was scrambling because all of a sudden it was like my show and I was trying to coordinate the graphics and the Teraflex and the video boards and all the things that we had taken out and taken on our plate. Suddenly we all started needing to happen right away in the final month before the season. So just be aware that you're adding more to your plate if you have to get creative on your budget like that. So we finally gotten to the actual takeaways. Hopefully we've been providing some throughout, but these girls' faces, I guess, is kind of the rewarding part of the whole thing. And that's a little cliche and cheesy, but honestly, that's what makes capital projects fun is you spend 2 years talking about their needs and how they would use a facility, and then you see them actually come in and use it, and it's pretty rewarding. So I would say the thing that I learned the most, besides all the cooks in the kitchen, is to ask questions and don't assume that people are just going to think you're dumb if you're asking questions. Like the best thing you can do for yourself is to just try to clarify. If you're sitting in a room and they're throwing around acronym after acronym, which happened frequently at the beginning of this project, and I would walk out and say, Brad, there were so many letters. I have no idea what we were talking about. So just knowing that it's okay to say, hold on, I don't know what an OAC is, or I don't know what MEP or RT or whatever it was, like to slow down and just ask the question, because like Whitney reminded me, like everyone in the room might have the same question, or even if they didn't, maybe they were interpreting it a different way than the person speaking was. So it really helps the whole team as a whole if you're asking questions, because then everyone's on the same page no matter what.
Yeah, and another key takeaway is it's truly a massive collaboration between a lot of different stakeholders and a lot of different people within athletics and outside of athletics, and on the construction side as well, and the design side. So just understanding that, you know, part of this project is really making sure you communicate, and you communicate effectively with your project team. And then the other part of a key takeaway is, you know, large decisions are made in committees. I would get a phone call from the contractor asking, what do we want to do about this? And typically I would love to just say what I think should be done. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of people that have to make that decision. So kind of understanding what those key decisions are and getting out in front of them early. Mallory talked about graphics is kind of one of those, where it's just not one person who gets to make a decision. There's a lot of different people. So understanding that you trying to get out ahead of those, that way you can at least be ahead of the game, and you're not necessarily scrambling to get answers while they're actually trying to do the work.
Yeah, and I would just add to that from the athletics side, like, you know, your people, and that, again, this is where your value comes in as the owner's contact. Like, you know that maybe your development or your marketing or whoever might need to be in on a decision, you know their process, and you know that maybe if you're going to send it to development, they're going to take another week to send it through their processes before they can give you an answer. So knowing your department and how things work through your department also helps you kind of stay on track and put things on people's plates early enough so that you get your decision when you need it. Moving on, this photo shows we're checking a counter height here. We ordered these stools and then learned that the counter that the architect designed was too short. So my advice on this one, this is like my most practical advice, I guess, from this project, is to check everything you possibly can. So it's easy to be intimidated by the stacks and stacks of drawings that happen during design. But if you just open it and start looking, I think you'd be surprised at how much you'll understand without any sort of architectural or construction background. And the more you do that, the better off your project will be. So check all the paint colors, check the door types, check the counter heights, the counter depths, all the different things that you can possibly understand in those drawings. Double check them, because a lot of times architects will use kind of boilerplate drawings and they'll just copy and paste from one project to the next, and they might miss it. They might not go back and check all those little details. And it's helpful for you to have, you know, that fresh set of eyes on it and say, why are you putting a door with glass to an elevator shaft? You know, and just stuff that maybe they never would have intended to do. It just happened to get copied over. And in the same light, asking for samples and mock-ups and anything you can do to visualize what it's going to look like, how it's going to function, so that you don't end up here redoing your countertop to match your stools.
To Mallory's point, you know, when you're looking at drawings, it's a communication tool, and the more you do it, the easier it gets. It's kind of like learning a new language. There's different symbols for everything. And so just digging in and kind of trying to learn that language and understand just helps you at the end of the day. And then this next takeaway, some people may be doing some smaller projects. I found that small projects are really relevant to the large projects because you learn a lot in those small projects. You learn who to contact and how to contact them, and who needs to be contacted for just every little situation. So it's definitely a learning process. The difference is large cap projects have longer lead times and larger budgets typically, but you do a lot of the same steps in the small projects. So really, if you're asked to go hang a TV or do something, it's relevant, it matters. You learn something from that can directly be applied to large cap.
So we'll just quickly run through here some before and afters, and then we'll give you guys a chance to ask some questions. So this is the team lounge. Obviously, before and after, there was all block wall, and we did what we could with graphics and furniture, but at the end of the day, it was a tiny block room. You'll see that this was one of the pieces Coach Bouchard really wanted to transfer over into the new facility, this neon Jayhawk. So it's hard to photograph, but it's pretty cool in person. So we did that. And then we also integrated an open concept. We had done this with our men's basketball program, having our film room, our lounge, and kitchenette that you can't see all in one space, multi-purpose space. And the volleyball team really liked that and wanted that in their space as well. So we replicated that. Locker room, the old one had vanities with mirrors in between each locker. So that was something as a female, Whitney and I had to advocate for, quite frankly, in the new locker room. Maybe doing your makeup for a match is a little counterintuitive, but it's a thing. So there are mirrors inside each individual locker now. And then also we made the conscious decision to put the seats in on the lockers rather than have the chairs. It just keeps it as a lot cleaner feel. Same thing with the double doors. Just everything can be closed up and clean. And that's a look that Coach Bouchard was very adamant about having. Before and after our hospitality space, so we used to put carpet down on our wood court and drop a curtain and bring in all this furniture, and it was not a good situation for our high-end donors. It also was a lot of work on our maintenance and facility staff, so this is a much nicer setup. We can keep this furniture here. It can be used for, this year we got to use it for our end of the year volleyball banquet, or it can be used, this is a men's basketball game day, I believe. Pre-game hospitality space. So lots of different spaces. And I think it'll become one of our heaviest used hospitality spaces in athletics because it does have a full bar, and that's not something that we have in other locations. This slide, I just wanted to throw in here to kind of point out that we really tried to keep the same atmosphere like I pointed out at the very beginning. So you still have the people right on top. And I guess we failed to mention that we kept the 3 courts. They got a little closer to each other, but we were able to keep the 3 courts in the new facility, and that kind of drove the whole design. So we still did have to do the retractables to make sure we had that, but that was a huge deal to Coach Bouchard, was not losing that competitive advantage. Whitney, you want to talk about precast?
Yeah, so we talked about it already a little bit, but if you notice it between the before and after picture, there's a totally different structural system. And since we were really tight against that alleyway, we had to be pretty creative about how we saved space. So that's kind of what drove us towards that precast direction, because it would be structural. It'd be an exterior wall. It would be, it could be multifunctional type of structural system. And then also what you can see in this picture is obviously the clear 30-foot ceiling, which we didn't have before. Mallory talked about that, where it was peaked at the top. Then the other thing that you can kind of start to see here is before Horsch was built, it wasn't really built for TV. That was a big conversation in the new facility, is how it's going to be broadcast all the way up to the lighting to where the cameras are located.
Yeah, so we did incorporate solid camera structures that are separate from the bleacher structures, so there's no more vibration, and they have enough space, and it's pre-wired, and it's a much better setup. Just another angle, and that does say Jayhawk in the correct font. Then I just wanted to show the banners, because that was another thing that Coach Bouchard really wanted to take from the old facility to the new one. We had an in-house graphic designer created these when they first started going to the tournament, and he really wanted to keep that tradition. So we just made them bigger and changed the format a little bit and brought them into the new facility. So questions.
All righty. Well, thank you. That was awesome. We do have some questions. We do have a little bit of time for some questions. So first one, and this could be answered by both y'all. What's your favorite aspect about how the entire project turned out? I know you mentioned a little bit about the reaction, and those are always nice to see, but I guess other than that, what was one aspect from both of you?
Whitney, you want to go first?
I'll probably say that at the end of the day, the people you worked with are still people that you wanted to talk to. I don't know if that always happens on construction projects. So the people that we worked with, and at the end of the day, it was a successful project, is one of the things that I liked most about it.
I think I'm going to go with the fact that we didn't honestly change the layout very much. So when it got time to plan the event and run the event, it ran very similar to the old facility. So the benches were in the same place, the visiting team locker room is in the same place. So it wasn't, it was brand new, it was shiny, it was very nice, but it still felt comfortable and familiar. And that was kind of cool.
Awesome. Another two-part, or not two-part, but both of you can answer this one as well. What is one thing you wish was different or had been done differently once the final project was complete? One of those moments you look back, you're like, oh, I wish we would have added this or taken this out or something.
Mallory.
There are several. So as I mentioned, like there's so many people in the room. And so you have to make some decisions and cut things that people want. And so then when you get to the end of the project, like when you're still the one standing there at the end, which I am, everybody's like, why didn't I get this? Why didn't I get that? And one of those was, quite frankly, a bathroom for our head coach. So obviously he's a male coach of a female sport. And in the old facility, he had a little one-holer that he could use quickly that wasn't a public restroom, and that got cut. And I hear about it all the time. So I wish we would have been able to do that.
No doubt, no doubt. So obviously a lot of people on this call are event managers and facility managers, and we oversee a lot of athletic facilities and projects and stuff like that. So as this project started in November, December, and went through multiple basketball seasons and other sporting seasons, track and stuff like that, how did each of your roles, your projects, your day-to-day operations change the busier the Horse Family Arena Volleyball Center got closer to completion?
Yeah, I always joke that I didn't do my real job for a year and a half because I was just constantly focused on Horse, especially like when you're, I don't know, I feel like I'm a really type A person. So like I dug in, like I was going to go through every drawing and point out every door and everything that was wrong and everything that I wanted changed. And that's time consuming. So I still had all those sports and I still had graduate assistants. I needed to manage student workers. Like I still had my job, my full-time job that I needed to do. So I think it was tough. It was definitely one of the biggest challenges was trying to just give all of my teams the attention that they're used to getting from me and then still give this project everything that I wanted to give to it as well.
For sure. And I guess for Whitney, was this your only project you were working on from the facility and planning development side of it, or was there other smaller ones you were working on as well?
No, so I definitely had a lot of other little projects going on. This was definitely the largest budget one that I was working on at that time. So I wasn't managing several $1 million projects, but our office, we do R&R, we do remodels, we do in-house things. So it's just kind of figuring out what needs what at the time and just kind of managing your time to make sure that everything is, all the pots are being stirred while you're cooking a little bit.
No doubt. So we got a couple more. What, if there were any thoughts that had to be considered or future planning for future upgrades of this facility? Obviously, it's a brand new facility that's been open 6 months or a little bit more, but future upgrades as technology continues to change.
Yeah, I'll let Whitney jump in a little here to be more technical than I'm going to be, but the one that stands out to me was our Rock Chalk video folks tried to be intentional, I think, about leaving open conduit and just room for future growth or changes that needed to be made, but because we did pre-wire the building, I guess. I don't know if that's the right terminology, but you can connect to the TV truck from the panel. And so just making sure that there was room in the future to kind of shift to the technology and have some adaptability. We also meant to mention, but I don't know that we did, we had not started our facilities master planning project before this building. So it was kind of an awkward in between of like, we knew we were going to do facilities master planning, but we hadn't done it yet. So just trying to make sure that this building wasn't like something way off in left field that wasn't going to fit into that plan at the end of the day.
Yeah, so we kind of talked about it a little bit too, like the TV. Whenever we were trying to figure out sightlines and where cameras needed to be, that was kind of a moving target because I think the Big 12 and Big 10 were trying to develop what that needed to be. So we were kind of designing at the time when we needed to be doing. So kind of hitting a moving target a little bit there, and just doing the best we could with the information we had was part of that. But on like the actual building as a whole, we look at like life cycle cost of everything that we do to try to anticipate where things need to be improved and updated as they move along. I don't know if that's kind of where that question is headed, but Mallory touched base on it a little bit. We do have our Rock Chalk video, which is actually in Allen. So it was quite an ordeal to get cabling and pathways over to that room. So it was trying to figure out what future needs would be and how we could maybe anticipate and include that now.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. Do you run into any environmental assessment issues within your campus community with projects like these?
So we do have people who look at that. I don't know if the root of what that question, if there's more to that question, but we definitely look at what facilities we have and what ways we can utilize them and what needs to be done. And then as far as environmental impact, I feel like that has pretty much the same footprint of what we already had. We didn't necessarily increase like paved asphalt or anything like that, if that's what that question's going at.
Gotcha. All right, well, that's all the questions we have. We appreciate y'all presenting today and wrapping up virtual CAOS from a presentation standpoint.